Nixon will win the 26 electoral votes of Illinois.
When Richard Nixon became president, he already harbored a deep distrust for the television networks. He was convinced the networks were filled with Eastern-educated liberals who would try to undermine his presidency. His first strategy was to try to outflank the TV reporters.
Richard Nixon called Henry Kissinger and me in one day, and he said, what is Walter Cronkite going to say in the first minute and a half tonight on CBS News? Henry looked at me and I looked at him, and the president said, don't you understand, you can control what Walter Cronkite says the first minute and a half. We've got a chance here to really dominate the network news on all three networks. Now, get busy.
But the television cameras kept focusing on the anti-war protests that were gnawing away at his popularity. So Nixon decided to do what he knew best, speak directly to the American people and bypass the press.
Many Americans have lost confidence in what their government has told them about our policy. And so tonight, to you, the great silent majority.
His appeal to the silent majority struck a chord with the audience.
I pledged in my campaign for the presidency.
President Nixon's popularity soared.
That we could win the peace.
With me in our CBS studios are my colleagues, CBS diplomatic correspondent Marvin Calvin, our national.
The networks then followed with a critique of his speech.
In your judgment,
Nixon was furious.
What, in your judgment, is going to be the reaction in this country to the president's speech?
Well, first, Dan, I'm not sure, but it seemed to me first that the speech cut no new ground. It seemed a soft-spoken, straight-in-the-eye restatement of policy that clearly is not aimed at that group of Americans dubbed by Vice President Agnew as an effete corps of impudent snobs. Rather, it was aimed, as the president put it, at you, the great silent majority of my fellow Americans.
Nixon exploded, went into a series of epithets which I will not use, called me, of all things, a Romanian agent. God knows where he came up with that one. And he sicked his government on me, which meant IRS checks, that is your income tax, would be checked every single year. My telephone was tapped. My office was broken into. I was tailed when I covered stories. It was a mess.
Period. I just asked where you were. I was afraid they'd say.
President Nixon then unleashed Vice President Spiro Agnew on the networks.
And the people of this country have the right to make up their own minds and form their own opinions about a presidential address without having the president's words and thoughts characterized through the prejudices of hostile critics before they can even be digested.
How dare they? How dare these cheap journalists comment on what a president of the United States has just said? They have no right to do that. Who are they?
Is it not fair and relevant to question its concentration in the hands of a tiny, enclosed fraternity of privileged men elected by no one and enjoying a monopoly sanctioned and licensed by government?
I was asked my reaction to Spiro Agnew, and I said he's full of crap. I got back to New York, and Reuben Frank, the president of NBC News, called me in and said, why did you have to say Agnew was full of crap? I said, you want another synonym?
It certainly stirred up the animals a lot more than they had been stirred up before, and made them perceive us as the enemy even more than they had. It drove them bananas.
And that's the point where, to me, Nixon took on the role of a man who was against the press, against radio, against the media, and wanted to shut down what we were doing if he possibly could.
The president called me.
The Nixon administration launched a campaign of intimidation and threats against the networks. The man spearheading the assault was special counsel Charles Colson. His colleagues describe him as a one-man terror.
To me, Colson clawed his way to the top by pandering to the president's worst instincts, which were there. But the president also had always had sentinels around to make sure that he could blow off steam one moment and not have anything happen. But as I've sometimes put it, The problem with Colson was if you just are blowing off steam and you say, I wish somebody would run over the guy with the truck, Colson would go out and hire a truck.
The White House, Chuck Colson, was very frank to threaten and say, if you go on doing this kind of thing, we're going to use the FCC to make sure that you don't get renewals for some of your television licenses. I mean, they made threats to the economic existence of CBS.
But I think the most chilling thing any White House person has ever said was that quote by Colson to Stanton, that we will bring you to your knees in the marketplace. He meant they would use the full power of the White House, of the Republican Party, to ruin the business of CBS. I think that's unfair, I think it's un-American, and I think it's reprehensible.
I want you to hit it frontally, strongly, and toughly. Is that clear?
Nixon was so disturbed at reporters that he had them placed on the infamous enemies list, and they were subjected to government harassment.
When my file was once read to me, the things that registered for Richard Nixon toward me was Harvard University educated, writer, broadcaster, liberal, not quite accurate, but that's what he thought, Jew, accurate. And that all came together as a very unhappy package.
Well, I got on the enemies list. And after I left NBC and went to work with Robert McNeil and PBS, Richard Nixon and his white-collar brown shirts made our lives unbearable. And finally I had to leave public television. I couldn't get work in television or print for 3 years. And finally, when I was named on the enemies list, my two sons thought it was a great honor. I said, well, considering the fact your father has not been able to find work in 3 years, it's an honor without profit in my own land.
President of the United States is impeached for high crimes and misdemeanors.
The Watergate story broke before Nixon could inflict any damage on the networks.
No. Mr. Rodeo.
The excesses of the Nixon administration were seen daily in the households of Americans.
27 members have voted aye.
The only network president who was on Nixon's enemies list believes the networks were saved by the Watergate scandal.
That resolution is adopted and will be reported to the House.
I think freedom of the press, freedom of the broadcast media to report what they should report under the First Amendment of the Constitution would have been curtailed. I don't know how far it would have been, but I think there would have been actions of the government. I think we would have lost freedom of the press.
Good evening. This is the 37th time I have spoken to you from this office.
Nixon could no longer fight the tide of public opinion.
Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President.
A year later, Americans were evacuated from Vietnam. The images of the fall of Saigon would scar a nation. Both the military and the White House learned a hard lesson from this era. Control the images on the screen before they destroy you.